Content warning. Episodes of Grey Matter may contain themes and depictions of extreme mental illness, traumatic bodily harm, and death. If you aren't in the right headspace to engage with those depictions right now, maybe this episode should wait for another time. Otherwise, proceed with caution.
Hi, welcome back to Grey Matter. Sorry, I'm a little low energy today. I just found out my sister got a promotion and it's really making me rethink some things. I mean, she designs postage stamps and she's got more room for advancement than I do. Granted, it's a noble profession, intersection of art and commerce and all that shit, but it does make you think. I mean, how do you know if you're wasting your life? There's no one to tell you unless you're one of those assholes with a good relationship with your parents or have a friend you actually trust. But for the rest of us, there ought to be some kind of government bureau, a Department of Wasted Potential or something. Anyway, that reminds me of a tape. Not the bureau thing, but the part before that, the wasted life stuff. It's called The Signal Man, and it's about a conflicted young man who's waiting for someone to tell him what to do with his life. Unfortunately, the sign he's been waiting for just might be on the fritz.
The Signal Man, written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from the short story of the same name by Charles Dickens.
It feels like I spent most of my life waiting. After a brief but glorious stint as a gifted child, followed up with a fair to middling college career and a degree that every dumb asshole I met called useless, I was working as an overnight security guard. The post where I was stationed was a concrete parking structure, 3 solid floors of brutalist gray stuffed with a rainbow of functional metal, and each car parked inside was probably worth more than I made in a year. The structure sat at the outskirts of the good part of downtown, just a few blocks away from the overpass that ran through the business district, and we got all kinds. On any given day, our clientele ranged from drug dealers to suit-wearing executives, with a wide sampling of regular humanity in between. It was usually quiet, aside from the occasional smash and grab or hot wiring, and most of my nights sitting inside the tiny shack on the bottom floor were spent waving to tired-looking people as they left, then watching something on my phone for 6 hours, before finally waving to tired-looking people as they started to arrive for the new day. I walked around inside the structure, too, memorized all the shadows, nooks, and crannies on my way to a bathroom break, and after a few months of doing it, I figured I had seen all there was to see. The red light across the street from the shack blinked endlessly, on and off in the space of a second each, casting warm electric light down onto the empty pavement. It was redundant, in the same way that I was, doing the job of a stop sign while I did the job of an automated call box next to a gate. But every now and then someone would look up and notice it before they pulled away, and every now and then someone would ask me directions to the closest 24-hour diner or the quickest way back to the highway. So I guess we each had our purposes. One night, though, somewhere between 2 and 3, the blinking red light began to flicker. I looked up at it, more confused than concerned, and watched as the flickering light flared flashes of deep red out into the dark street. The next street lamp was a few yards away, just far enough that the glowing cone of orange didn't reach our entrance, and as the flickering continued, I sighed and settled in for a long night of mild irritation. A flash of movement caught my eye, and I turned my head. There, standing just in front of the tall pole that the blocky traffic signal sat on top of, stood a tall, dark figure. I couldn't make out their face, only the shape of their forehead and cheekbones, illuminated in blinks by the red light from behind, and as I stared, I saw the figure raise an arm and extend a hand, the movement barely visible between flashes. Hello? I lingered by the door to the shack, my finger hovering over the button to open the gate in front of me. The figure's head seemed to turn with my movement, and as the light began to flicker faster, I saw it reach its hand out towards me, its fingers extended like it was telling me to stop. Do you need help? What's your name? I took a cautious step towards it, and the figure stiffened, waving its arm frantically at me as the red light strobed behind it. I squinted, trying to make out the details of its features without getting any closer. One of its legs was crooked, half bent to one side, and its head seemed to twist stiffly on its tilted neck. It seemed to move in stop motion in the flickering light, lurching forward into the street as it frantically waved both of its arms at me. The shape of its mouth opened, and its eye sockets widened, its face still pitch black. Jesus! No, don't! I clutched my ears and stumbled back, then bounced my heel against the curb and fell back onto the sidewalk. The black figure lurched forward in shuffling, shaking motion, its movements seemingly limited to the split second that the street was bathed in darkness between flickers of red light. Its mouth, if it could be called that, was open and blaring, ear-splitting noise, and its long fingers seemed to tremble as its twitching hand reached out towards me. I slid back on the sidewalk, raising a hand to protect myself as I pushed myself against the security shack, and as the hideous, flickering thing's shadow loomed over me, I raised my other hand to cover my eyes. Then the light went out. I sat shaking, huddled in the dark with my hand over my eyes for what seemed like an eternity. Every second I expected to feel its dark fingers brush against my raised hand, or hear the warbling static from its mouth up against my ear. It could move freely in the dark. It could do whatever it wanted. I looked up, watched the red light start glowing again, blinking at its regular speed over the empty street. That thing was nowhere to be seen. It could have been anywhere now, crouched down in the shadow between two alleys, clutched onto the bottom of a fire escape, slinking down into the sewers where there was more dark to disappear in. Had it made the light flicker? Or did the flickering light attract it somehow, like a blackened, shuddering moth to an electric flame? Did it matter? I sat staring at the blinking light for the next few hours, half convinced that what I had just seen was a nightmare. The image of that thing, the sight of it, was burned into the very front of my mind, seared into my eyes as effectively as if it had been a red-hot poker. But when the traffic light went out again a half hour before dawn, and I felt the terror of the dark overwhelm me for the first time since childhood, I knew that what I had witnessed couldn't have only been imagination. I slept badly that day, even with my oscillating fan and blackout curtains, and as I tossed and turned, there was only one thing I could think of. And the next night at work, I couldn't stop myself from staring out at the dark traffic signal sitting on the pole on the other side of the pitch-black street, my fingernails digging into the armrest of my chair the entire time. But when 2 a.m. became 3 and kept going, and the dark, faceless thing made no appearance, I started to relax. Somewhere between 4 and 5, a utility truck from the city slowed down and stopped, and a worker got out. As he approached the dark light, holding a flashlight in his outstretched hand, I crossed the street to meet him. Hey, how's it going?
Well, I'm up before the sun is, so not great.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Are you here to fix the light?
Yep, looks like a burnt bulb. Shouldn't take more than a couple minutes to swap it out. I'll tell you what, though, there's more broken traffic lights around here than anywhere else in the entire city. Just last night, 5 different corners had their bulbs burn out, all right around this street. It's actually the last one we're getting to.
Now, why... How does something like that even happen?
It's gotta be the wiring. Something plugged into the wrong place, or some rat that chewed through the wrong cord. I don't know, but I'm getting tired of fixing it.
Does this happen a lot?
Every couple of months. It's always the same time, though. 2:37 a.m. on the dot, like clockwork. I'm Brett, by the way.
Anthony. Has anyone ever seen anything?
Seen? Like what?
Oh, I don't know. Just anything weird?
I see a lot of weird shit working nights. I'm sure you do too.
Yeah.
But hey, gotta make a living, right? What does a guy like you make anyway? Working security?
Less than you, I guarantee it.
You'd be surprised. Municipal jobs are cheap as hell. Guys like you and me were necessary but invisible. Fancy building projects, new furniture, decorations for City Hall. That's the stuff they'll spend on. Not what do they call it? Unskilled labor?
Yeah, I know what you mean. All I do is sit here every night watching the world go by.
Sounds good to me.
It's the kind of thing my grandpa used to call an honest living. Of course, back in his day, it was enough to live on.
Guys like us kind of missed the boat, huh? I never even thought about college when I was in school, and here I am. Up before dawn, changing light bulbs. Hell of a way to live.
Hey, I've got a degree and I babysit parked cars.
Well, I guess I don't have it so bad then. Alright, that should do it. I'll circle around in an hour or two to make sure it's still working.
Trust me, I'll flag you down if it's not. It gets creepy as hell around here without it.
It's funny. That's what the last guy used to say.
What?
The guy that trained me. He was the superstitious type. He always hated coming around here. Said there was something off in the air. Some kind of energy.
What do you think?
I think maybe he just had a sixth sense for bad wiring. It would explain all of the accidents, though.
Accidents?
Nobody told you? There's crashes here all the time. The road's too narrow, or there's some kind of blind spot or whatever. Just one of those freak things. Nobody even... There was one yesterday afternoon. Some woman pulled out of your lot. She didn't know to stop because the light was out, and bam! She got T-boned by a garbage truck. Died on impact, I guess. I don't know if that's just something they say or what, but...
Oh my god.
Yeah. She didn't even get to eat dinner, you know? Or hug her kids. Imagine dying in your work clothes.
Trust me, I do it all the time.
That's the spirit.
Have other people died here?
I don't know. Probably, yeah. There's a woman I work with who used to be an EMT. I can ask her if she ever took a call around here.
She was an EMT and she works for the city?
They get paid worse than we do, man. I really do have to get going, though. There's a hot coffee in the truck that's calling my name. Take it easy.
Yeah, you too. I thought about what he said, watching the blinking light across the street in silence as the sky turned pink and the sun slowly rose. It was a quiet walk home, too. Snow crunching softly under my boots, gray clouds rolling back to a pure blue sky. Even the familiar city smell of garbage and car exhaust weren't enough to ruin it. But when I laid down in bed at my apartment, I still tossed and turned. I saw the thing in my dreams, each ragged detail of its black silhouette and the concave shadows where its eyes and mouth should have been. I saw its arm waving back and forth, pulling lines of floating light along in its stiff back and forth motion, and with each flash of deep red light I could make out more shapes behind it. I saw cars first, then watched as shadowy people moved from their cars into towers of solid black, and as the black towers shrank and shifted, I saw the crisscrossing geometry of the streets and neighborhoods that made up a city. Each street, each building held 100,000 different stories and 1,000,000 dark figures that started and stopped at the instructions of colored lights. Stop, came the voice from the past. Go, said the voice of the future, and the figures obeyed. They moved in a hideous, pulsating rhythm, shifting and shuddering into place along the backdrop of steel and concrete their fathers had built. They were like ants, following each other down a dimly lit street in bulging, quickening lines, moving back and forth according to the pace of the great yellow signal in the sky. And when the great yellow signal sank and the great white signal rose, it told the ants that it was time for bed. Everyone but us. The midnight people like Brett and I. The stagehands that came out to move the sets between scenes. We saw the parts they didn't. The empty world they left behind every night, sleeping safe and secure, knowing that we'd always be there to keep an eye on it for them. Was it too much to ask for us to be able to pay our bills? I woke up just after the early winter sunset, showered and cooked myself dinner as I thought about my dreams. There was still some feeling I couldn't shake, some tug pulling at the back of my mind. Was I a different thing than any of the people in the hustling, bustling crowds that pushed past each other under the sun while I slept? Or was I just a defective ant? What would I look like under the harsh light of day? A failure? A living container of wasted goodwill? And that thing in the dark, the signal man, what did it look like? Was it some kind of monster? A fiend in silhouette? Or, in the cold daylight, would it look something like me? What did it want? That night at work, as time ticked steadily towards 2:37 a.m., I tried to keep myself occupied. I played a game on my phone, listened to podcasts and music, even tried to start a book I'd been putting off reading before giving up because I couldn't pay enough attention to it. Every time I would stop, even for a second, my eyes would flit over to look at the flashing light, watch the red, black cycle, and squint to try and make out any shapes in the dark behind it. The dream stayed with me, and the way it made me feel, like one small, interchangeable part in a rumbling, rolling machine. In a city of millions, in a world of billions, who could ever really give a shit if one man was afraid of the dark? At 2:35, I sighed and massaged the sides of my head, trying to keep my heart from racing. There hadn't been anything last night, and there wouldn't be tonight, but if there was... I got up from my chair and stepped out of the shack, then looked back across the mostly empty parking structure at the small bathroom on the corner of the building it was attached to. There was nothing special about 2:37 a.m. Nothing. It was just a normal time, and nothing I could do would change it. So it wouldn't matter if I wasn't here when it came and went. I started walking through the structure, looking out through the gaps in the concrete walls at the dark city outside. There were lights, reflections, power lines, and telephone poles. 100 identical traffic signals at 100 identical corners. There was nothing special about this one. The lights dimmed, but I didn't turn to look. Why should I? There wouldn't be anything there. So what if I couldn't see the red light blinking in the reflection of the scattered parked cars as I walked past them? There weren't even that many cars left overnight anyway. And it didn't really matter what time it was, regardless. I felt a little safer in the bathroom, especially once I had locked the door, but when it came time to unlock and open it, my hands started to tremble. There wouldn't be anything outside. Of course there wouldn't. I probably hadn't seen anything in the first place. It was just coincidence. Superstition. My finger brushed the doorknob, and a jolt of static electricity shot into my hand. I jumped back, shaking my arm in a momentary panic before my brain could catch up enough for me to laugh at myself for being so nervous. This was getting ridiculous. And over what? A monster? A ghost? I pulled the door open and stepped out into the parking structure. I was met with pitch black and deafening silence. Instead of the hum and buzz of the yellow glowing overhead lights, a powerless fixture sat suspended in inky black. I slid a hand into my coat pocket and fished out my phone, fumbling nervously as I tried to turn on my flashlight. Jesus! My phone clattered to the cold pavement at my feet as I stumbled back, my eyes locked on the parked car only a few yards ahead of me as its alarm blared and lights flashed. The shadows behind the car seemed to loom out from under the concrete roof, stretch past the thick rafters and over the faded yellow lines as the lights flashed on and off in a familiar rhythm. And as I crouched down to pick up my phone, I felt my throat go dry. cars, all the cars, blared and flashed and screamed into the star-filled night in one thundering rhythm, flooding the dark concrete expanse with patches of red, orange, and yellow. I clutched my hands over my ears, my eyes flitting back and forth between the visible cars as the shadows underneath them warped and stretched, and the ground itself seemed to shake under my frozen feet. Suddenly, the furthest alarm stopped, jarring one step out of rhythm with the others before cutting off. The far end of the structure, where my narrow little shack sat in front of the unmoving gates and extinguished traffic light, was dark again. Another car alarm stopped, plunging more of the concrete room into silent black, and in the shadows, I swore I could see something moving. It was walking, lurching forward, its shoulders sliding unevenly underneath a broken neck, and the hollows where its eyes should have been thinned as its head turned to face me. It raised a black, bony hand and stretched it out, fingers fanned as far as it could manage, and as it staggered past the next lit-up car, the alarm shuddered to a stop. What do you want? Did you die here? Do you have a name? The thing tilted its head, only a few steps from where I was standing. I could barely see it now, with all the lights out and cars quiet, but the rough, jagged edges of its blackened skin seemed to ripple like a vinyl record skipping on a player as it considered my question. Then, all at once, it pulled back into the darkness and vanished, leaving me alone in the dark. After a few long, terrifying seconds, the lights above me flickered back to life, and I felt my heart pounding in my chest as I scanned the parked cars for any signs of movement. There was nothing.
Hello? Anthony?
Brett?
Yeah, where are you?
I stepped around the side of a car and looked across the building at the narrow guard shack, where Brett stood with a cardboard cup carrier and a confused look on his face.
I brought coffee.
Did you see it?
What?
That thing.
I don't know what you mean.
What about the alarms? Did you hear the alarms? The car alarms?
But, are you okay?
No, I saw something. Just now, and the other day too. The night before, when that woman died.
What do you mean, something?
I don't know. A ghost, I guess, or whatever passes for one in real life. An impression, a recording, but shaped like a person.
What did it do?
It keeps trying to touch me.
Why?
Do you really think I have any idea?
Okay, why don't you sit down? Here, try some of this. I wasn't sure how you took your coffee, so I guess cream and sugar. Hope that's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. What are you doing here?
Well, I'm lonely and I knew you'd be up, so... No, but seriously, I've got some information you're going to want to hear.
Information about what?
Maybe nothing, but maybe about your ghost. I asked Jess, that's the EMT I work with, about this street, and she gave me enough horror stories to fill a book. All those accidents I told you about, almost all of them are fatal. Women, children, dog walkers, probably a homeless guy or two. This corner has more shredded bodies than a gym.
Jesus.
Sorry. But the one she thought of the second I asked, the worst one she ever saw, that guy worked here, in that little shack, back when this was just a lot. He died in like 96 or something. She said she still has nightmares about it.
What happened?
There was a kid across the street with his mom, right after school let out, dropped some papers and ran out into the road to try and get him. The guard on duty came running out of the shack, pulled the kid out of the road half a second before he got pulped by a city bus. His head smashed against the front headlight, legs got pulled under as the driver lost control. By the time the bus hit a streetlight and stopped, he'd been dragged under the wheel and along the sidewalk for almost a block. The kid, thank God, didn't see it. Not a scratch on him either. But the guard... Jess said most of his face was gone when they got there. Smeared across the asphalt like red butter with scattered teeth. He was trying to breathe, but mostly just gurgling, lying crumpled on his side halfway on the curb and halfway off. He tried to look at her when she got down next to him, but his eyes were just... I guess there just wasn't much left. But she took his hand and waited for a few seconds as he passed, just watched his lungs empty and shoulders slump. He couldn't even let out a death rattle, just blood-covered spit. He was on the news, I guess, some smiling picture while the anchors called him a hero. Said that he had worked as a security guard his entire life. He liked to birdwatch, did some watercolor painting. But when she looked at that picture, all she could see was the side of his face, all torn up and bloody like raw meat.
What was his name?
She said she couldn't remember.
Security guard all his life. And he died at work. What a waste. I mean, what did he do? What did he accomplish? How many years did he spend sitting in this fucking shack, waiting for something better to come along? What kind of a fucking life is that? He died at work.
If I died at my job, I would literally beg God not to make me haunted.
No wonder he's angry. He has to live in that moment, that exact second, when his last breath came sliding out just because he was trying to do the right thing. One choice, a split-second reaction. And he has to suffer for it forever.
If it's even him.
Are you kidding? That's Ghost Story 101. Do you think somebody can die like that and there's nothing left over? A smear on the psychic sidewalk? A stain? Blood, pain, and a wasted life all smashed together in hell.
God. I mean, what do you even do with that?
What do? I put in my 2 weeks fucking notice.
Can you afford to?
I don't give a shit. I can't afford to die. All of those accidents, all those deaths over the years. Knowing what you know now, do you really think they're just a coincidence?
You think he's causing them? Making people suffer the way he did? Punishing them for what that bus driver did?
I don't know. I don't want to find out. I put my notice in that morning. I had no plan, no other job offers, and no hope of ever getting hired for anything I actually wanted to do. But what other choice did I have? I could wait, fritter my life away on phone games and audiobooks, until some drunk asshole's car plowed through the guard shack or the ceiling collapsed to make me a concrete tomb. Or I could go. I could live. A real life, not the one I was wasting here. The days passed slowly, especially between 2 and 3 a.m., but Brett came by around that time every night we were both working to help the time go quicker. I think he was curious, too. Maybe he wanted to see the signal man, the thing I was living in fear of seeing a third time. There was something about it, some pull, like the feeling you get when you're standing at the edge of a tall building, or the second before 2 cars collide in the middle of the street. There's a gravity to it, to the horror. But 2 weeks came and went, entirely without incident. Brett was disappointed, and I was relieved. And on my last night, while we sat and drank our coffee as 2:34 turned to 2:35, I let myself start to believe that it was over.
You know, he really had me going with that ghost bullshit.
What?
Your signal man or whatever. Really thought I might see it.
So what are you saying? That I lied? That I had a bad dream and thought it was real?
I just think it's a fucked up way to get a free coffee, that's all.
You asshole.
What did I do? I really wanted to see it. A real live ghost. Well, not... You know what I mean.
Yeah, I do. You should consider yourself lucky, though. Looking at that thing, it's like looking into the face of death. Like it's always been waiting for you, reaching out, ready to grab you just when you let your guard down.
Ugh. Fuck that. You know what I don't get, though?
What?
Well, I've been thinking about it, about the whole thing, and, I mean, if it's him, he died in the afternoon, right? Right after school let out. So why 2:37 a.m.? Why show up then? I mean, you were the only one around. Why would he want to scare the shit out of you?
I don't... Brett looked up at the ceiling as the lights dimmed, and when they went out, I rose to my feet. Behind us, the blinking red light flashed on and off in its steady, familiar rhythm. It's here.
It's here?
Stay close. The lights flickered back on above us, and across the street the blinking red light flicked off. We waited, but it didn't come back on.
It was just an electrical surge. Jesus, man, you scared the shit out of me.
Brett, wait, I'm not...
I can't believe I got that worked up over... I mean, you really had me going.
Why would I...
Well, since I'm here anyway, I better switch out that bulb again.
As he stepped onto the sidewalk, I saw a flash of light in the corner of my eye. A garbage truck was barreling down the snow-covered street towards him, without any of the distance it needed to stop, and before I could even open my mouth, he was stepping out into the road. I shot forward with an arm outstretched, yelling a warning as loud as I could. He turned his head to look at me, facing away from the oncoming truck, and in a second I was on the sidewalk. The next second I was in the road, my hand on his chest shoving him back into the other lane, and the light in my eye was almost blinding. At the last second before contact, I turned my head to look at the truck's front bumper, and a lifetime of wasted potential washed over my mind like a flood. Oh well. What more could I have done? Maybe I'd just missed my green light. A strong hand clamped down on my shoulder and pulled me back, ripping my arm out of socket as I flew out of the truck's path. But as I fell, when I hit the pavement, it was daylight. It was summer. I caught my breath, lying halfway on the sidewalk, as light shined down onto me from a blue, cloudless sky. Pain was radiating out across my chest from my dislocated shoulder, and the skin felt like it was burning, but I hardly even noticed. There was a man lying on the sidewalk in front of me, his face half shredded and his neck broken, and as his grip loosened from my shoulder, I saw his hand fall limp to the ground. He looked at me, as much as a man without eyes can be said to look, and his torn-up lips tried to open over a shattered jaw. Even though he couldn't speak, even without a word, I knew what he was asking. I'm okay. I'm okay, thank you. You saved me. I heard bones cracking as the dead man tried to turn his head, and I followed his gaze down the sidewalk, where a terrified mother in a windbreaker was clutching a red-headed little boy to her chest. Yeah, him too. You saved him too. He's okay. I heard the blare of a siren behind me, stretched into eternity in the space of a second, and a paramedic stepped over me, through me, to crouch down at the man's side. They weren't really here, and neither was I. The mother, the child, the bus driver sobbing and stumbling out through a shattered door. They were nothing but memories. Ghosts. And the man on the sidewalk, the one pouring his life out onto the pavement, he was the only one here. I reached out, my hand passing through the crouching EMT, and took his hand. I squeezed it, and as a rough, black texture of ridges and cracks spread up on the point of contact, I felt his hand squeeze back. The black liquid crawled up, stretched across his skin and covered him, blotting out his torn-up features in a sea of ridged, uneven black. The edges of his form seemed to shimmer, almost jittering as I stared down at him, and for one long, solemn moment we were there together. I was just a tourist, really, a visitor in the solitary confinement of his never-ending last breath. But even behind the rough, pitch-black sheen covering his skin, I could tell he was happy I was there. You did it. You saved us. Just rest now, okay? You can rest. And then, all at once, the world plunged back into darkness.
Oh my god, you scared the shit out of me. Are you okay?
I slowly sat up on the wet sidewalk, looking up at Brett as he reached for my hand. Behind him, I saw the garbage truck skid to a stop, its brakes locking up in the snow before catching again, then watched as the driver scrambled out, his face pale and terrified.
Do you know where you are, man? You saved my life. You pushed me out of the way. I thought you got hit.
No, he saved me.
Who did?
I reached up with one hand and pulled down the collar of my shirt. Underneath it, a long, fanned-out handprint was burned into my blackened flesh. Brett looked at it gape-jawed, then at me, and as I slumped back to the pavement and passed out, I heard him calling for help. Later, I don't know how long, I woke up in the back of an ambulance with a paramedic shining a light into my eyes. After snapping his fingers to make sure I could hear, and running his pen back and forth to make sure my eyes could follow it, he leaned back and gestured to someone just past me. Brett leaned forward into the light and tried to smile.
Can you hear me? Anthony, can you hear me?
Yeah, Brett, yeah, I'm okay.
Don't try to move. I'm right here.
Okay. I figured it out, though, Brett. 2:37 a.m., that time. Do you know why? It wasn't when he died. It was when I was supposed to. He had the days all jumbled up and the years, but he was trying to save us. Me, that woman, everyone who died on that street. Just like he saved the kid. He was trying to warn us.
Just relax, man. We're on our way to the hospital. Don't get excited.
Just listen to me. It wasn't a waste. His death, his life, it wasn't a waste. Not to him. He'd have saved us all if he could. He was just doing his job. The next morning, after the doctors set my shoulder and asked me endless questions about the handprint burned into my skin, questions they didn't believe my answers to, I sat and thought about what makes a life. Maybe there was a nobility to the ants, each one in their own way, even if they strived and struggled and suffered in a world that didn't give a shit about them one way or another, just as long as they watched out for each other. People like Brett and I, we watched the world while the others slept, made sure everything was working when they needed it most. And, in an ideal world, they watched out for us, too. I didn't know if I should go back to my job, or even if I could, and I didn't know if there would be anything waiting for me there if I did, standing beneath the blinking red light with a hand outstretched in warning. I hoped not. He'd done the job for so long. He was due for a delayed retirement. As for me, maybe I was stuck. Maybe just for a year or two, or maybe for as long as I lived. But as long as I was alive, the choice was mine. I could stay or I could go. Just as long as I looked both ways first.
The Signal Man was written and directed by Jonathan Inbody and adapted from the short story of the same name by Charles Dickens. It was edited by Jeffrey Lavin, with music composed and performed by Samantha Hunt. Anthony, the narrator, was played by Jonathan Inbody, and Oriana Quinn played Brett. Gray Matter is a Word Search Media production. Any similarities to real people, places, or things is purely coincidental. Be kind. Rewind.